That raises the question as we watch, perhaps here we have the special counsel entering the room now. And let's pause to listen to Jack Smith as he addresses reporters.
Good evening. Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots, and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people. They defended the very institutions and principles that define the United States. Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues. In this case, my office will seek a speedy trial so that our evidence can be tested in court and judged by a jury of citizens. In the meantime, I must emphasize that the indictment is only an allegation and that the defendant must be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. I would like to thank the members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who are working on this investigation with my office, as well as the many career prosecutors and law enforcement agents from around the country who have worked on previous January 6th investigations. These women and men are public servants of the very highest order, and it is a privilege to work alongside them. Thank you.
Why didn't you charge any of the other co-conspirators in this matter?
And there we have Special Prosecutor Jack Smith saying this is an unprecedented act, an attack on the bedrock function of democracy. He was typically laconic. Bob Costa.
One thing to note that the special counsel did not is former Vice President Mike Pence, based on this document, is a central, crucial, key witness in this investigation. This indictment says Pence took contemporaneous notes, and date after date of Pence's recollection of events is there. We know Pence met for hours with the grand jury, but to have a former vice president who was in the room with Trump, often one-on-one in the Oval Office, and now testifying in detail to the special counsel, he could end up being the most important witness in this case.
Because do you think, Bob, it's not just X happened after Y, but he has some ability to speak to what was inside the former president's
And he can
head.
speak to possible criminal intent. Now, Pence has said publicly he does not know, and it's not for him to judge whether Trump had criminal intent in his actions. But by Pence detailing what Trump said, for example, this indictment says Pence recalled Trump calling him not too honest, as they had a private conversation about the election. And so Pence is someone who was weaponized at the end of the presidency for Trump. And to have him cooperating with the investigation gives the special counsel an eyewitness account that someone who's not a lawyer or some Trump functionary.
And to put this in a political context, let's also remind ourselves that the former vice president is now challenging the former president for the nomination of the Republican Party in 2024. So he is a witness against the former president, as Bob Costa just outlined, and is a political opponent against him. And he is a primary fact witness and a constitutional empowered officer of the executive branch. And that makes him the most important, or if not the most important, one of the most important fact witnesses, because he saw this entire progression of the argument through all of the ways that Trump was thwarted through the legal means of challenging the election. Then he went to extra legal means, and he was the recipient of maximum pressure on that extra, according to the indictment, extrajudicial pressure to overturn the election.
But go ahead. Here's the thing. You know, a lot of this obviously, allegedly, happened behind closed doors. But what's so frustrating sometimes about the former president is that he'll say things publicly where a prosecutor or even his own attorney would be flabbergasted, just telling him, please stop, don't keep putting this information out there. So a lot of what is in this happened publicly.
We're going to turn now to Scott Frederickson, a former federal prosecutor. Scott, what's your take after taking a look at this and listening to the special prosecutor in his remarks?
Yes, I think one thing that strikes anyone who has watched Special Counsel Smith is that he does not show emotion very often. He showed emotion today when he talked about the fact that this indictment is brought consistent with the prosecutions of the individuals responsible for the deaths of 5 law enforcement officers and the mob, the violent mob that attacked the Capitol. And when he talked about that here at his brief news conference, you could see he was emotional about that, and that is driving him when he said this was an assault on democracy fueled by lies of a president.
And just to underscore that, Scott, so the point is that while in the political realm this might get discussed in all kinds of maybe even abstract ways or in political terms, what it sounds like he was doing is saying 2 bedrock principles: accountability and also that there were real victims here who held the line when somebody else was trying to cross it.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think what surprises most of us here is how much of the January 6th events have been made a part of this indictment. Many thought that he would avoid that and the incitement of the violent mob coming up the Capitol. Instead, it's a central part of the indictment, especially when he gets into the detailed rendition of the attempts to change the vice president's mind in almost a Shakespearean mano face-off, but detailing falsehoods over and over again told by the former President Trump in an attempt to change the vice president's mind.
Former federal prosecutor Scott Frederickson, thank you. Ricky Kleeman, our CBS News legal analyst, is with us now. Ricky, you've taken a longer look at this indictment. What else have you concluded? We're going to go back to Ricky in a second. Bob Costa, you know the players so well in this drama. Sticking with your idea, your point about the president being the central actor here, if Mike Pence is another key person, who else are you looking for as a useful witness for some of what we don't know or what the special prosecutor may have come up with in this indictment?
So I'll always remember the night of January 5th. I was outside the Willard Hotel. And while Trump had a hotel for most of the time he was president of the United States in Washington, down on Pennsylvania Avenue, the other Trump hotel on the eve of the insurrection was the historic Willard Hotel. Because inside that hotel on January 5th, Rudy Giuliani, Steve Bannon, and so many of their associates were calling Republicans in Congress. They were pressuring them to do Trump's bidding. They infamously issued a statement saying Pence was in agreement with Trump's position on January 6th, even when he was not, causing Pence to erupt along with his aides and say that's false. And so you have the Willard under the microscope now. Everyone who was inside the Willard plotting with Giuliani and Boris Epstein and all these other associates to try to overturn the election, and those outside who were intense, getting ready for the rally the next day and to attack the Capitol, and then, of course, across the street at the White House talking to Trump late into the night. All of these people are now in the spotlight based on this indictment of the special counsel. He is not just painting this, based on this indictment, as something that was a bit of a bad idea gone wrong. He is saying that there was criminal intent to deceive the American people, to defraud the United States, and to mount a multi-pronged conspiracy. It's hard to digest that this is being alleged to happen, and it's being done by the Justice Department at the highest levels against the Republican frontrunner.
Right, indeed.
And the indictment pays the former president a compliment indirectly. in the sense that his vocalizing falsehoods about the election had a dramatic, galvanizing, and impassioning effect on much of the country. Reading from page 2. To make his knowingly false claims appear legitimate, create an intense national atmosphere of mistrust and anger, and erode public faith in the administration of the election. The indictment says the former president achieved all of that just by the sound of his voice. Conferring upon him one of the things that former President Trump likes to say about himself. He has a movement, he has a voice, and people respond to it. All true, former President Trump. But you use that voice, you use that influence in ways that are now putting you in criminal danger.
Knowingly used it to advance a criminal scheme. Ricky Kleeman is apparently back on the line. Ricky, you've taken a further look at this indictment. What do you come up with?
When I look back, John, at my prosecutorial days, what I wanted to know were who are the victims, what did they suffer, and how did they suffer? Well, the major victim here, of course, is democracy. The secondary, or perhaps in tandem victim, are the American people. The third victim are the American voters. All of those go together. But when we look at the individual paragraphs, what we have to remember, in addition to the people in Congress who might have suffered serious bodily harm, injury, and even death, what we have to also look at is Mike Pence as a central victim in this indictment, and that Mike Pence became a person that Donald Trump, according to the indictment, wanted to do his bidding, and that was to change the election result, that Mike was supposed to do the quote-unquote right thing. But when he didn't, at the time that the Capitol is being breached, that Donald Trump's tweet, when he goes and says that Mike Pence didn't have the courage to do what should have been done to protect our country, et cetera, which is in paragraph 111, that is what spurs on the chance of hanging Mike Pence. And if Mike Pence had not been spirited away by his Secret Service, he might not be running for the nomination today.
CBS legal analyst Ricky Kleeman, thank you so much. Ricky, now we want to go to Chief White House correspondent Nancy Cordes, who has a thought. Nancy?
John, it was notable in that brief statement that we just heard from the special counsel, Jack Smith. One of the things he did say was that he's going to be seeking a speedy trial. That's notable because we know that he's not getting a speedy trial in the case in Florida having to do with former President Trump's handling of classified documents. That case is not going to go to trial until at least mid-2024, just a few months before the presidential election. If he were to get a speedy trial in this case, let's say early 2024, then the trial could take place and we could have an outcome well before the 2024 election takes place in November, possibly even before the end of primary season. And that's notable, of course, because President Trump is currently the runaway frontrunner, according to recent polls. And actually, his lead appears to be growing all the time. This is something that the Biden campaign is obviously watching very closely because they are anticipating a matchup again against former President Trump. But when we asked the Biden campaign whether they had any reaction to this new indictment, they said, as predicted, no comment.
Nancy Cordes, thank you, Nancy. Scott Frederickson, I want to bring you back in on something that Nancy hinted at, the calendar. But let's forget the political calendar for the second. How does whoever is in charge here operate all these different investigations and indictments and court trials all at the same time? There are three, the president's indicted 3 times, plus there are several civil cases. How does all that get coordinated?
Well, it's a good question. There's no formula. It's not provided for in any federal rule, let alone any state rule. Oftentimes, it's the first case indicted, and they take it in turn. But I think what's interesting here is that this case, which will come to the arraignment for the former president on Thursday, this case could actually jump ahead of the Mar-a-Lago documents case for one important reason. There are no classified documents involved in this case, and the classified documents are a serious complexity in the Mar-a-Lago scheduling. It takes a lot of time to work through those issues. There are none of that issues here. So I wouldn't be totally surprised if this judge, the new judge here in Washington, took this case and moved it ahead and moved it into early 2023 ahead of the Mar-a-Lago case. Of course, the former president will fight that and want to delay it till after the trial. But I think the judge could also make a point that this is the most important case. This is the one indictment that charges criminal conduct while the president was in fact in office as the president, unlike the other cases. So it goes to the heart of kind of the most important charges against him. So I could see this case getting moved forward in an earlier time spot.
All right, Scott Frederickson, thank you for that analysis of the calendar. Once again, former President Trump has been indicted by the special counsel on 4 counts tied to his attempt to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. Among the charges include conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding. Our coverage will continue on CBS News Streaming, your local news, and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. For all of us here in Washington, I'm John Dickerson.
Hello, I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington. A federal grand jury has voted to indict former President Trump in the January 6th investigation. He faces 4 counts in the indictment, including conspiracy to defraud the United States. The former president has been summoned to the